And it was just at sunset, and we're looking up, and we're all standing together in a line. And you can just see this massive, massive avalanche. And it's like, 200 feet away is what it felt like. And there was no question that we could like turn and run away from it because we couldn't move. And it came, and the next thing we knew, we got hit by the wind and the whole snow cloud of it. And we were all just waiting for it to hit us. And that was it. That would be the end.
Hi friends, ski season is just around the corner and I am so excited for it. I'm sure you are too. But that was Hilaree Nelson. She's been called the best mountaineer of her generation. Notice I didn't say female mountaineer. With over 40 expeditions under her belt and a career that spans 3 decades, with her best accomplishments culminating over 2017 and this season, in her late 40s as a mom, she is officially National Geographic's Adventurer of the Year. Yeah. Just last year, she returned to Burma to climb an old nemesis called the Peak of Evil, which first defeated her in 2013. And a few weeks ago, Hilaree and her partner became the first people to ski from the summit of Lhotse. She's been someone I look up to for a long time now. As a mother and one of the strongest women I've ever encountered in the mountains, she's kind and humble and truly seems to be peaking in her late 40s, proving that we can truly just keep getting better, even in the midst of many failures. In a world that tends to dispose of female athletes, or really any athletes at a certain age, she is proving the impossible. She's come back from leading failed expeditions and failed marriages alike, to keep finding her best self in the mountains, which I can attest to as she has helped me become a more efficient tourer. Just a few sweet tips of pole holding and things like that can make a really great role model, and she's done that for me. This is Showing Up. I'm big mountain skier and adventurer Lynsey Dyer. I started these conversations to inspire the unicorn in you, to embrace your weird, do the thing, even if you suck at it, and fully show up for this one wild and precious life. It's tough times right now, but someone like Hilaree can definitely lift your spirits. I caught up with her at Mountain Film, the documentary film festival in her hometown of Telluride, Colorado, and this is my conversation with a true badass and inspiration. Thank you, Hilaree Nelson, and enjoy the podcast. Okay, so go ahead and introduce yourself. And what would you call your main title right now?
I have just changed my name back to my maiden name, so I've gone from Hilaree O'Neill to Hilaree Nelson just in the last few months. So it's funny when people ask me my name, even that I like trip up on.
Right, we've been through a lot of changes in the past couple years.
Yeah, there's been a lot of changes in the past 3 years. My title is I'm a professional ski mountaineer, but I feel like there's so much more to it than that, so I trip up on that as well sometimes. But yeah, that is the official
and mom
title. And mom. Yep. And adventurer might be a better overall umbrella.
Yeah.
For what I do.
I'm so excited to get into some of the recent stories.
Yeah.
So we're in Telluride, your hometown.
Yes.
What are all the panels you've had a really big weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have any film. So we're here for Mountain Film.
Yep.
I mean, I live here, so I've been a part of Mountain Film on and off for the last, 17, 18 years. And a lot of times I'm not here because it's actually also sort of my expedition season.
Right.
So a lot of times I come home on the Saturday of Mountain Film. But fortunately this year I was here the whole time.
So typically you're in the Himalayas or?
Yeah, Himalayas or even South America or Alaska, whatever. But, that expedition season is often April through like early June.
Yeah. Are you finding that that's shifting now because of climate?
I don't think it's shifting so much because of climate. It's just, if anything, it's almost like the window you need to a lot more time because you just don't know what you're going to get on any given season.
You just came back from Alaska with Kit, and I know the weather was pretty tough. Will you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so
is
the Arctic in general is like one of my favorite places, and especially the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge because I went there for the first time in 2010, and it was another incredibly tumultuous and difficult period in my life. And going there was like just this incredible wild silence, and there's a spirit to the place that I can't even explain well. And it just was a huge place for me to heal. And so I've always felt really connected to that place. And then Kit invited me to go up there again this year. And it was a shorter trip this time, but we really struggled with weather. So we only had 10 days that we were supposed to actually be in the refuge. And it took us 4 days to get in there. So that cuts your trip down to 6 days, which is a really big difference. But it was just very unseasonable, an unseasonably late spring. And I think that actually was a little bit contributed to climate change. Our pilot noted that it was the first time there had never been, in his experience, I should say, there'd never been pack ice formed on sort of the western side of not quite the Beaufort Sea, but as the Beaufort Sea kind of drops down into the Bering Sea, there was no pack ice there. And so all this crazy weather, which, usually the pack ice is a bit of a weather barrier and keeps those winter storms in check, it wasn't there to do that this year. And so a lot of those storms came, barreling across and just created really unsettled late spring.
Interesting. Do you mind talking a little bit about that first trip and what you were struggling with and how being in nature helped you heal?
Yeah, so that first trip, it was in April, May of 2010, and I had a 2-year-old and a less than 1-year-old. And I'd had a really difficult childbirth with my second child, in that I lost a ton of blood and he was really sick when he came out. And so we spent like a week in the NICU, and it just took me a really long time to recover. And I went, right after I had him, I went into emergency surgery for 2 hours and was separated from him. And then as soon as that was over, they separated me from him again, and he was in the NICU, and it was super traumatic. And then when he was about 7 months old, so only 3 months before I went to the refuge with Kit, I had a really horrible accident guiding, heli skiing. And it was my first day back guiding after having kids. And one of my clients, we were done with the run and we were trying to just cross this really benign river, and she just lost her heel edge and fell backwards. And it's even crazy to explain, but her head got trapped under an undercut bedrock and she drowned within like a minute.
Oh my goodness.
And I was the only one there, and it really, as you can imagine, really traumatized me. And, I went home to a 7-month-old and a 2-year-old, and my 7-month-old, because of all the things, he was really colicky, and first year of his life, it was a lot of what comes with colic, crying and just tough sleeping and all of that. So it was one thing after another. And I managed, through help of family and friends, to be able to break away for this trip and go to Anwar for, it was still only a 2-week trip, but it was just, unbeknownst to me, it was exactly what I needed. And so I was very grateful for that trip. And then just the experience there with just the sheer vastness of it, and what that means to me. Like, I really love that, being a small person just trying to survive in this big, massive landscape where you're insignificant. And
it's simple out there.
It's just so simple. You're just in the moment, and it really, all it is about is surviving, and not like just surviving in the sense of all you're worried about is shelter, water, food, and staying warm. And it's like really simple.
Right. And then maybe an objective.
And the objectives are fun, because that gives you like this immediate focus and this goal that can
purpose and
a purpose and all of that. And it just
it's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's funny. I always have thought you get accolades, for getting to the top of something, right? And we make these heroes out of mountain climbers, and not that it isn't difficult, but I feel like real life is so much more in the gray zone, right? There isn't, it's so complicated, and there isn't one primary objective to get to the top. And then, you have so many things that
blindside you in life. I guess for me, and it's funny because I've actually never really thought of it this way, but expeditions and climbing and trying to summit something and having this objective is like a reflection in this really compressed time frame of life in general. And I think that's why it's so...
What do you mean, a reflection of...
Well, I think it's very similar to life, but you get it in a compressed time frame. In that, like, I'll go on these expeditions to crazy places, and we all set goals for ourselves in life. Like, I knew at a young age that I wanted to have kids and I wanted to get married, and I had this utopic version of how all that was going to turn out. And it's the same every single time I plan an expedition, like take Myanmar or Burma trip, for example. Like, this is a place I'd known I'd wanted to go to for 15 years. And I had this utopic vision of how we were going to, I can visualize we're going to stand on the summit and, high five each other and everything's going to be awesome. And I mean, wow, it couldn't have turned out differently. And we didn't stand on the top, and we had this crazy human drama along the way, and so many things happened that I never could have imagined. And I feel like that is life. That's how life is.
Yeah.
And sometimes in life you stand on the summit, and sometimes you don't. And sometimes you stand on the summit, but it doesn't mean what you thought it was going to mean. And sometimes you don't stand on the summit and you're kind of glad you didn't. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. I think that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Do you want to just get into that Burma story?
Yeah, otherwise, we totally can. I mean,
usually I'd say like take me back to the beginning and let's go from there. I mean, we might as well.
Do you want to go back to the beginning, or you want to just talk about Burma?
Well, I guess we could get there.
Yeah.
So whichever one works for you. Like you said you always knew that you would do all this. And so maybe we should start at the beginning.
I sort of started on this path when I left home to go to college.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Seattle, Washington. And ironically, I grew up much more on the water than in the mountains. I learned how to ski at a young age, but I was like a weekend warrior. I never raced or anything like that. And then most of my outdoor experience was growing up on a boat with my parents and my brother and sister.
Like sailing?
Power boat, but like this old wooden boat that my parents fixed up from kind of this broken down nothingness to this beautiful, they still have it. It's like a 1959 Chris Craft antique boat that my mom was a woodworker, so they, just fixed it up, and it's a beautiful boat. And I take my kids on it now with them. But those experiences left a huge impact on me as I move forward into... Like what? Would you guys do as a family? It was just wild. We'd be on this boat for 6 weeks at a time, and you had to figure out how to occupy a small space and how to be patient and how to entertain yourself, which has a lot of very similar qualities to mountaineering and being stuck in a tent in a storm, and live off the land a lot of times through fishing and clamming and getting oysters and all that kind of stuff. And bears on the shore and pods of orcas, and like there are a lot more
the
whales.
Unknown of weather.
It was just the unknown of weather. And it wasn't out on the ocean because you're in the inside passage, but it was just huge tides. Sure. And, I remember one time we were fully motoring and hit a rock and like had, almost sank and had to like make our way back to this one harbor in order to like keep from sinking. And just like, it was just like
that makes so much sense. I've always wondered how you develop that skill set, like you said, to suffer for a long time.
And just, I could play card games for 8 hours at a time, as like a 7-year-old. And puzzles. And you would think that I needed the skills for the athletic side of mountaineering, but really I think it's the mental side of it. And, so then, I went from there. I don't know. I always kind of have had a habit of, I wouldn't say not making bad choices, but just making choices that aren't normal, I guess.
Not taking the easy route.
Yeah, like instead of going to the University of Washington, I decided to go to a small college in Colorado. And then right after that, I worked for a few months in Hood River and made some money, and then went to Chamonix, and I lived there. Instead of for a few months, I stayed there for almost 6 years.
Are you fluent in French?
I mean, I'm fluent
Ish.
in talking about skiing in French
Sure.
and talking about weather and food and things like that. But and a lot of that's faded away because it's kind of a long time ago.
Is that where your first ski mountaineering adventures came from, with Chamonix?
Yeah, I mean, ironically, my parents didn't understand what I did at all. But at the same time, when I graduated from college, they got me a guided trip up Mount Rainier. And it was with a friend of mine, and I was able to bring my skis, and that was like really my first experience on a glacier and, up high, and I loved it. And then that sort of...
What was it about that first trip that you were like, yeah, this is for me?
It was Mount Rainier, so which is in my backyard, of course, an iconic peak. And I don't know, it was just sort of the culture of the people that we were with, and like seeing the guides work together, and just being out and sleeping out and being in the winter, I mean, it was a 3-day trip, but it just left an impact on me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just learning that you can sleep in the snow
at
high elevation and survive and actually be quite comfortable.
And also like just tying in on a rope together and like looking into a crevasse and just being totally blown away. And then it was only a few months later, maybe 6 months later, I started my own little company with another girlfriend of mine from college, where we had a food stand in Hood River, and we sold bento boxes and made food out of our kitchen, and we did really well. And then I just took that money and moved to Chamonix with her, but she left after a few months, and then I just stayed.
So when did you make the transition from recreational to getting sponsored and all that?
So that was about 3 years later, so 96 to then in 1999. I'd been doing a lot of kind of competitions during that time in Chamonix.
What kind of competitions?
Like the free ride comps.
Okay.
Some of the first ones where they were only sure, I won one year and I got second place the second year in a playing field of like 3 women, literally. So it's not saying that much.
Yeah, it was the birthplace.
Yeah, it was totally the birthplace. Like my biggest competition was Jesse James, who's Jesse Davenport, married to Chris now. But so
that first competition.
Yeah. I mean, it was pretty funny. I mean, it was, it was with all the crazy guys that kind of went on.
Who were the kind of the names that were around?
Oh my God, now I'm totally spacing. But like Jim Morrison was one of them, and oh gosh,
was Chris Davenport there too?
Chris Davenport was there. I think Chris and Jesse were already like dating at that point. Shane McConkey.
And Chamonix was like the Mecca.
It was the Mecca. Like that year, 1996, was like the Mecca when all... It was sort of the beginning, because it was when those competitions started. It was sort of the beginning of all that extreme kind of comp stuff.
Yeah.
And so I got really into, not so much the racing, I just got really into climbing. So I guess back up, I wasn't a huge skier growing up, but so when I went to Chamonix, it was like kind of like eye-opening, like how amazing these skiers were. And I got to be a good skier, but I've never been like this incredible fast hucker skier. So
but
when I
did you have the climbing background? Is that...
Well, no, and I had no climbing background.
Oh, wow.
I learned how to rock climb when I was in college.
Okay.
And I'd never ice climbed or done anything like that. But I had this like endurance suffer gene, and when I started combining the two of like ski touring and all of that, it was like, oh, like this is for me. Like I love this. Like I can beat everybody up the mountain, and then and I had this sort of like precision descent thing. So I really liked skiing down hard things that didn't require speed but were super technical, that had, rope work, and I have a math head and a science head, and that all kind of played into the knots and the technician of making these turns in ice and finding a line and a new route and all that kind of stuff. So that's sort of where I found my niche, I guess.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I've always wondered, how it all came together. Would you say most ski mountaineers nowadays are more coming from the climbing side, or where?
No, I mean, I still think most ski mountaineers are probably. It's a tough one.
Yeah,
I
would
mean,
you
I
say
think it feeds in a little both.
But it sounds like the main thing you need to have is the suffer gene from my perspective.
Because I mean, if you truly want to go on a ski trip, you're not going to go on a big ski mountaineering trip, because really you're like going uphill 90% of the time, or carrying your skis on your back.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times the stuff I ski
it's not that fun.
Not that fun.
There's a reason I'm not a ski mountaineer.
Yeah, like it's super technical.
It so much.
But you're on a trip for a month and you ski 3 days maybe, and what you're skiing is like wind sastrugi at high altitude in a windstorm, and
it's mostly just to get to the next.
But there's something that really, it resonates with me, and I really love it. And there's something about finding that line in these crazy big mountains, but it's definitely not for like the person who really just wants to go have fun skiing.
Well, and you're only relying on yourself and your team, and it's really just you out there.
Yeah. It's super remote, and it's like there's a huge human dynamic role as part of it, and just the survival of it and route finding and all of that stuff I love. So
So tell me a story of some of those early times, epics, or something you were really proud of, or something that was really scary.
I mean, most of my early epics were in India probably, and like one trip where I was with Kasha Rigby, and it was my second trip to India, I think. And we were just going to do this traverse, and there were 4 of us. We had like an Indian guy with us, and my boyfriend Hansoli Barefus at the time, a Swiss heli pilot, and Kasha and myself, and we got out into these mountains and got stuck in this crazy storm. It snowed 6 feet.
Oh my gosh. And you guys are in tents? Or?
We were in tents, and we kept having to move our tents and dig them out, and like avalanches were coming down everywhere. It was super intense, and we had these huge loads because we were going to do this massive traverse, but we ended up not being able to do the traverse, and we were just picked the quickest way out. And we packed up all of, Kasha was on tele skis, and I remember one time her tips dove so hard into the snow, and she fell flat on her face, and her pack was so heavy that she couldn't get up. And it was scary, actually. And so, like, we had to run back uphill and, like, pull her up by her pack because she was going to, like, not be able to get out of the snow and asphyxiate.
Whoa.
Which was gnarly. And then we had to navigate out this valley and over these, I just remember the biggest avalanche debris I'd ever seen in my life, And this was only my second year of ever doing expeditions. And then,
how were you navigating? By maps, or?
We had maps, and Hansoli knew the place fairly well because he had flown there with Himachal Heli, which is a ski.
Yeah, I've flown there.
Yeah, and they're still there. And so he'd flown there a while, and he knew that we were going out it's called the Milana Valley, and he kind of was a little bit quiet about it. He was like, this is our only way out, and we have to go this way, but it's definitely not ideal. And as we started getting lower, and we were coming out of the snow, and it starts getting where you have your skis on and your skis off, and and our stoves broke too, so we couldn't melt water. We were really hosed in so many ways. And we start walking through these fields, and I'm like, God, what is this? It smells really funny. And we were walking through these huge hash fields, like pot fields, basically.
That too.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
And we came out to this tiny little town where, if you're at all familiar with the Indian caste system, the Western white person is basically as low on the totem pole as possible. We're untouchables.
I didn't know
that. And that has changed.
Why?
A lot. Just because we're not of the same religion. I
assumed that they might assume that you're rich because you're white and Western.
Yeah, but in the way the caste system is, it's not in a good way.
Right.
So we came into this village where, and I'd only heard that before. I'd never actually seen it in action. Usually, for the most part, people are like, "Oh, Westerners, how exciting!
You're like special.
You're special." But this was the first time where they were like angry. They did not want us to be there. I think part of it was because we'd come through all their like secret fields.
Yeah.
And the other part of it was that we were like untouchables, and so we could only stay in this one place that housed the occasional Westerner that went through there, and nobody would touch us. We couldn't walk off the paths. If we walked off the paths, they threatened us with being stoned, like actually throwing stones at us. And I don't know, the whole thing was just this crazy experience, to the point that like Kasha and I threw in the towel in the mountains and ended up going like to Goa and going to the beach and like renting motorcycles.
Why
and
are we
hanging
doing
out.
this?
Yeah, why are we doing this? But
can you talk about that a little bit, of like what it was like to be women proposing trips, and how that was early on? Were there people that you were looking up to, or were you guys kind of the pioneers on the North Face team? And
I mean, we definitely weren't pioneers in the sense of like the first women doing expeditions, but I think when it came to ski mountaineering and doing these all women trips and
getting them funded
and you know and going to these super remote places like Lebanon and Mongolia and Kamchatka and Russia and like all these crazy places, it was really unique. And we didn't always know what we were doing or how to do the research or how to get the right food. Like I remember one time buying bags and bags of what we thought were couscous, and it turned out they were like poppy seeds. And so we ended up having to have dinners of poppy seeds when we were out in the mountains, which is like not good at all and like really disgusting and no nutritional value. But, so it was a really steep learning curve for us. And I think for...
Who mentored you guys?
I mean...
Or did you really just have to figure it out?
I mean, Kasha had been doing it before I started, and so I learned a lot from her. I did a lot of trips early on with like Willie Benegas, who's part of the Benegas brothers from South America and stuff, and I did trips with him. I mean, I was so passionate about it that I just went on any trip I could go on and went anywhere it would take me with anyone at all, I'm much more discerning now than I was back then. At one point, I definitely remember early on being like, I need to go on all women's trips, because I felt like I couldn't learn when I was the only woman on an all man trip, because I didn't have enough confidence in myself to really like have my own voice. Like you were letting them
make the decisions and set the lines and all that.
Yeah, and because I didn't know how to read a map well, and I didn't know how to look at terrain and be like, well, we should go this way. And so I found that I did a bunch of trips with Kasha, I keep saying, and Kit and Ingrid Backstrom and different women kind of over and over again. And those...
They helped you become more in a leadership role.
We just communicate differently. We'd sit down and actually look at maps and be like, should we do this? Should we do that? Margaret Wheeler, she's another girl I did a lot of stuff with. And we just learned that way.
Do you want to talk about that? About like what in your experience is the best scenario as far as the team goes?
I mean, it's not... No longer is it a gender issue for me. It was early on when I needed that gender specific team in order to learn. I learned better in an all group of women at that point in my life. Now it's not gender specific. Now it's more personality, knowing somebody, trusting somebody, understanding the objective and what we're trying to do, and relating that to people I've climbed with or haven't climbed with but know a lot about, and so on and so forth. So yeah. So
are there any other significant stories that like just crazy things like before? I mean, my next question is going to be, what was that transition like to go from traveling the world, saying yes to every trip, to motherhood? But before you get there, is there any other stories that are worth telling?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite stories, because I've learned this over the years about myself, like and people tell me this all the time when I come home from a trip and I'm like, I failed, we didn't get to the top, and people will be like, you didn't fail? That was the craziest adventure I've ever heard of. And that slowly over the years sunk in.
That just to be out there
is an amazing thing, and I come home a different person a lot of times, and that feeds back into being a mother and how that's problematic sometimes. But I realize that a lot of the stories I tell when I come home from these places aren't about standing on the top of something. It's all the stuff that kind of happened along the way. And one of the amazing things was it was early on, it was one of my first all women's trips. And it was amazingly successful. Like, we stood on the summit of all these different things, but along the way, it was in the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia. And before we went into the mountains and started climbing, we got like a big Sikorsky helicopter that dropped us on top of one of these volcanoes. And I skied down first, and I remember hearing all this noise in the background that was weird. It wasn't helicopter noise. It was just loud and like growling. And I stopped and I turned around and I looked up, and there were these grizzly bears up on the side of this mountain, like just below, like not far from the summit even. And I noticed one was really big and one was only sort of big. And then there were two babies, two cubs, and they were fighting. And it was a male and a female, and they were fighting. And the other three women in the group, Kasha, Melissa McManus, no, there were 5, Victoria and Jessie Davenport, came down, and we were watching these bears basically fight. The male was trying to kill the female's cubs, and not only for food, but then to get the female to go back into heat and mate with him, which sounds like triply cruel and brutal on so many levels. And I don't know, we were just all standing there watching this go down for 2 hours.
Whoa.
Until he finally got one of the cubs, and she managed to run away with the other cub. And it was like all just standing there sobbing, like freaking out watching this happen. And we were, 200 feet away. It was insane. So yeah, that's the thing that sticks out in my head.
Yeah. I can see why.
Yeah. It was pretty wild.
Wow. I'm just loving too that it's a bunch of women.
Yeah, it was a bunch of women
watching,
and we were all like pre having our own kids, and I think all pre being married, pre everything, just young, and watching this happen, and just like, what? Oh my gosh, this is insane.
So you talked about being different when you came home. In what ways would you find that you were different? And then also, like you said, what do you mean by it being problematic?
Well, I think a lot of times some of these adventures are so far out there. Like the Isle of South Georgia, where we were on a boat for, 7 days each way over the Scotia Sea, and got caught in these crazy storms that almost sunk us a couple different times. And
that's just getting to
and that's just getting there, and then getting trapped up in the mountains a few different times, and the ice, and just the extreme nature of it all. And I remember coming home, and I couldn't, and this was before kids, but I've done these adventures since having kids. And I mean, I couldn't leave my house for 2 weeks. I just couldn't go outside. I just couldn't talk to people.
Traumatized or like the culture shock?
Both. Yeah. Pretty traumatized. I couldn't, like, the space around me of just like vehicles and noise, and then a lot of it was just traumatized from these windstorms that we got caught in. And like, I mean, we got caught in a windstorm where we had an anemometer that read 140 miles an hour. I mean, I got picked up off the ground with like a 60-pound pack on my back and thrown like 200 feet through the air just from wind.
Wow. So it sounds like you confronted your mortality a few times.
Yes. Yeah. And maybe that's it. Like, sometimes it's funny. I heard Corey Richards talk yesterday, and he said, like, in his brain, when he got caught in this avalanche, he had accepted that he was going to die, and then he didn't die. And then it's like, how do you
recover, come back from
make
that?
your brain start working again and reset to like, wait, I am alive. I have to be back and engage and like talk to people again.
So have you had those experiences where you thought you were dead and you accepted that? And
yeah, I have. I mean, I wouldn't, not tumbling around in an avalanche, but just being in these places or situations with an avalanche coming down on top of me that I have.
So what was going through your head, especially hearing, Corey's experience? I've heard that story.
Yeah.
And we actually did a podcast yesterday too.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I got that. So how was it different from what you heard him explain in your head?
I don't know if it was. Well, I guess one difference for me is that I've always had an incredible network of friends and family to support me through a lot of things. but it's very much an individual struggle. And
I mean, specifically, what happened? What was your experience, or one of them?
oh, one of them. Well, the first time I went to India to try and climb Papsura, we were all at our original camp at like 14,000 feet. And I hadn't picked the camp. Julia Manega had picked it. And so I wasn't totally aware of like our surroundings and where we were. And we got caught in another huge storm, snowed 3 feet in 2 hours. And the sun was just setting, and we all heard this. So I say that because you can't move when there's that much snow around camp. You can't run. There's nowhere to go because you're just wallowing in snow.
Every decision is...
Yeah, you're stuck.
It can be life-threatening.
Yeah.
Every decision.
Yeah, and we all heard this huge crack and knew it was an avalanche, and we're in this really narrow valley, and it was just at sunset, and we're looking up, and we're all standing together in a line and looking up, and you can just see this massive, massive avalanche, and it's like, 200 feet away is what it felt like. I think there was a little bit of trick of light. It was much further away than that, but just coming down huge. You could just see the white as it covered the cliffs and was coming down. It was massive. I just remember Chris, or was it Anjan, reaching over and putting his hand on a shovel. There was no question that we could like turn and run away from it because we couldn't move. And it came, and the next thing we knew, we got hit by the wind and the whole snow cloud of it, and we were all just waiting for it to hit us.
Yeah.
And that was it. That would be the end. And it just never did.
So you just got blasted by the wind.
We got blasted, and everything goes into a whiteout for a minute, and then the whiteout just cleared away, and the avalanche was gone, and we were still there. And in reality, what happened is that Julia had picked like the most perfect spot she could have picked, and there was this berm in front of us, and so when the avalanche came down, it hit this berm, and it turned the avalanche maybe 50 feet away from us, 100 feet away from us.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, and nobody talked. I remember Chris Figginshaw just handed me this flask of whiskey. We all finished the entire flask and then went to bed and like didn't really talk about it.
But you all had trauma from that.
I mean, I definitely did. It was intense. And I know, Chris and I went back there last year and took a different approach, so we weren't in that spot again. But like, it was definitely something we talked about. Yeah.
So how have you found ways to cope, or do you just not? I think something that Corey said was that you as much work as you can do, therapy and whatnot, you just, it's still there. And every time he hears a rumble or a thunder or the rumble of a car, it does come back regardless of how much recovering you can do.
Right. I mean, I think back to the death of the client just heli skiing in my backyard. And every day I had to go to the fire department here in Telluride. Her body was in there, and her fiance, her boyfriend, who was going to ask her to marry him that day.
No.
Yes. He was in there, and I had to tell him what happened. And that place is a point of trauma for me. Sure. And I had to go home that day. I was still breastfeeding. My milk dried up. I basically was convinced I was feeding my child poison at that point.
Oh my gosh. And
within like 5 minutes of coming home, like my friend who had her own baby, she had to leave, and I was left alone with my kids, and my husband wasn't there, and I just still to this day, it's like super traumatic. And then every single day for 5 years, I had to bike back twice a day in front of that fire department to take my kids to school or preschool or whatever it was. And so it was just this constant, and I still do to this day, go by it all the time. And I think of it every single time.
Wow. So,
I'm like starting to grip the microphone really hard. It's and that was in my backyard. So it's such a hard thing to explain, because I wouldn't take away any of those traumas, because I like who I am today. and I'm who I am today because of everything that's happened to me in my life.
And you haven't stopped doing what you love.
And I haven't stopped doing what I love because
that's who you are.
Is just who I am, and I'm passionate about it, and I'm finally seeing in my kids their like understanding of who I am as their mother, and I do my best to just kind of accept those risks.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's hard to communicate it to other people, and
it
don't
doesn't
always want to talk about it.
And it doesn't necessarily get healed. It
doesn't necessarily get healed, but I mean, I don't think there's one person walking this planet who has not suffered something traumatic and had to figure out how to just go through life.
How to keep living.
How to keep living. I mean, that's life. That is life.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So how was it to make, I can't even say transition, but to go from being able to follow the wind and to becoming a mom?
Honestly, it was terrifying
for
me, actually, because I have always known I'm not somebody who can follow a schedule. Like, I physically cannot have a consistent day-to-day pattern in my life. Like, it's just not
and that's
possible.
Like what kids need, right?
And that's all you hear about. They need to have their nap from 1 to 3
it's all about
in
schedules.
The afternoon,
that's what you
it's
hear,
all
right?
about schedules. And I guess I just had to figure out how to be that person, and it was hard.
And not to lose yourself.
Not to lose myself in it, and I did not do it perfectly. I made a lot of mistakes along the way, and I mean, it just was really hard.
Yeah.
It was really hard for me. But the funny thing is like every day I felt like I was failing at something. But so I think every parent, every mother feels that way. The other thing that was really unique and sort of unexpected for me into becoming a mother was the guilt I had associated with it, like paralyzing guilt. Like, why am I this person who is okay with leaving my kids to go climb a mountain? Like, what is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? And I don't know, and I have a lot of like,
even though men have been doing it for years.
Yeah, even though men have been doing it for years, I think we're just connected differently to our children when they're very young. I think as they get older, the father connection and the mother connection become much more similar. But when they're very young, the mother's just connected in a different way.
Yeah, you just can't leave.
And yet here I was, like, I left my first son when he was 10 months old and went to Pakistan to climb an 8,000 meter peak for 2 months. Like, what is wrong with me? But at the same time now, flash forward 10 years, and I see who my kids are and how healthy they are and happy and confident and independent little beings that they are. And it's good. It's all okay. We just do our best in this world, and we raise our kids the way.
And do you think that
the best way we can?
You have been the best mother you can be because you didn't lose yourself, and by being happy.
Yeah,
that was
the irony though is going on these expeditions doesn't necessarily make me happy.
Oh,
I
assumed that.
It makes me complicated sometimes. It makes me very emotional. They're like incredible highs and lows that go along with these expeditions, like the trauma of leaving my kids, and then the exhilaration and the adrenaline from being on expeditions, but then they're not successful, and then I'm really hard on myself if I spent this time away from my kids.
And it's not like vacation.
Successful. It's not like vacation. They're intense. But again, that just goes back to like, that's what makes me me. And it's not being happy. I'm not meant to like have this, perfect rainbow with a pot of gold at the end and be happy every day. Like I like the tumultuousness of my emotions and the roughness of some of my experiences and
the challenge of figuring it out.
And the defeat of not always figuring it out, and pushing myself and finding out what my physical and mental boundaries are. And I think that is not always related to happiness, but it's more fulfillment.
Thank you. That was beautiful. That you nailed it. And it's part of who you are.
Yeah.
I could go on for hours and hours. So I'd love to do it again sometime, but thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks. That was, sometimes I dive in there too deep.
No, it was absolutely awesome.
All right, well, thanks.
Good luck with, I mean, what's next right now? You just had, really quick, you've had such an awesome couple years of really getting back out there. Yeah. And it's been great. I've been able to like tick off some things that I really have been obsessed with for years, and it's good. And I just got back from the Arctic, which isn't like hard climbing or scary. It's just remote and it's beautiful and it's wild. And so that was an awesome trip. And I'm hoping I'll go back to the Himalayas in the fall. And I don't know. Well, thank you for being a pioneer. Yeah. Thank you for being someone to look up to.
Yeah.
Leading the way. It's not always picture perfect, like you said, but you're staying true. You're doing it.
Yeah, I'm still doing it.
I'll babysit.
No, for better or worse.
I'll come hang out.
Okay, sweet. All right, thanks.
Thanks so much for listening, friends. I hope this lightened your spirits today. If you enjoyed the conversation, give us a review on iTunes. Spread the word and be sure to subscribe. Until next time, see you in the mountains, unicorns.